I'm Jeff Yost. I'm with the Nebraska Community Foundation. It's really nice to be here with all of you today, and I've had the opportunity to meet some of you and look forward to the opportunity to meet more of you. With me today is Cindy Huff. Cindy is on the statewide board of directors of the Nebraska Community Foundation, also the chair of her local affiliated fund in McCook. What we're going to talk about today is a phenomenon that's been going on for, all of human history. It's the transfer of wealth. It's the wealth that moves from one generation to the next. And it's really an amazing phenomenon, especially as it relates to philanthropy and community philanthropy. So we're just going to dig into this to some extent, and then we're specifically going to dig into a community story of how people in that community are having conversations with their friends and neighbors about what they want their legacy to be and the impact they want to create. So if that makes sense, we'll get started. We always start with this. And my presentation this evening will really start with this as well, is Nebraska is a place where everybody and everything works. So we can sit and bitch until we're blue in the face about things that aren't quite right. But the vast majority of my life and the vast majority of the communities we have the opportunity to work in are full of abundance, and they're full of good things. And if you think about what inspires people, and of course such a huge part of philanthropy is inspiring people to be part of the conversation, people aren't inspired by what's wrong, and people aren't inspired by us complaining. People are inspired by what's possible. So all of our work is a conversation about the future and a conversation about the fact that we have the resources to create the future that we want. So when I was a little kid, I was loved by lots and lots and lots of adults. That's a pretty amazing thing just to be able to say as an adult, because, I was the sixth of six kids, so I had plenty of trauma coming with that, but I also had plenty of love coming out the other side of that. Lots and lots of people I know had very, very similar experiences, right? So it's like, how do we start these conversations around, we have lots of blessings, we have lots of abundance, what do we want to do to be able to take care of this generation and the next? What are the things we can all do to be good ancestors? So these are the top line results of this transfer of wealth study that all of you get a document that looks like this, okay? So these 4 points are on the inside of that. You just stop walking under that speaker. Nebraska has incredible wealth, and all Nebraska communities have wealth to give. There's 532 incorporated places in Nebraska, and a whole bunch of other little hamlets as well. The wealth is transferring now, and we must act with urgency. Our communities need these assets, and many are already successfully putting them to work. And number 4 is the most important one. When we leave some of our wealth to the places where it was made and accumulated, we can ensure a more prosperous future for our Nebraska hometowns. But how do you make it personal? How do you talk with people? Because, of course, one of the things I've talked about for years is philanthropy has nothing to do with democracy. None of us get to vote. Donors decide. Their money, their sovereignty, their choices. How do we help people really engage in those choices and make choices that are going to create, and for any of you that were at lunch or in the session that was in here right before, choices that are really going to help raise all the ships in our communities. So you may say, okay, what are we talking about? Well, here's what goes into our study. So the transfer of wealth includes financial assets, savings and checking, life insurance, residential real estate and homes, and retirement accounts. And then in Nebraska, you have lots and lots of closely held assets in farm and businesses, and then agricultural real estate's a huge piece of that. But it's not as huge as you might think. People that farm to a large extent and still farm, most of them are reasonably well diversified. So part of the question is always, well, we want the kids to continue to farm. Well, there are absolutely ways to sort of look at the tangible assets, which are like real estate, and the intangible assets, which are like stocks and bonds, and say, okay, what of these things do we want to go to the next generation, and what of these things do we want to go to help create and sustain our community? And if there's any questions as we go through this, feel free to jump into this. Minnesota is going to look very, very similar to this. I'm an economist by training. So that line starts in 78. Of course, we had the ag bubble of the early 80s and then a decline. But we look at the increase in the value of the value of agricultural land in the last 20 years. Extraordinary. Our primary financing tool for schools in Nebraska is property tax. And of our 240, Cindy's a retired superintendent, so she probably know this or at least close. Of our 244 school districts, how many of them receive equalization aid these days? 50?
If that. Mainly the Lincoln, Omaha metro.
Right. So, I mean, and we all know this, right? Poor farmers, there aren't very many poor farmers anymore.
What's equalization aid?
So you have enough resources per student to be able to give them an equitable education.
And so the 50 that you're referring to might be in larger metropolitan areas?
Right.
Or more rural areas?
Most rural areas receive no equalization or state aid.
So the state doesn't collect any property tax. All the property tax is collected at local political subdivisions. So this would be the state giving sales and income tax dollars to school districts. Sorry, used to doing this stuff in Nebraska, not someplace else, right? All context is local. So, I don't know exactly what it looks like in Minnesota. I have to think the trend line looks something similar. You know, so this is just by type of farmland. You just look at the numbers. So what's this all mean? Nebraska is about 1.9 million people. About 2/3 of those folks live within 50 miles. They live within or within 50 miles of Lincoln and Omaha. So pretty decent sized metropolitan area, and then a huge amount of the rest of Nebraska. Massive geography, a geography comparable size to Minnesota, with just a few 100,000 people in it. We think in the next 10 years, $100 billion is going to transfer from one generation to the next in Nebraska. This is the third study we've done in 20 years. So our methodology has continued to get better each and every time. And I was just shocked as we were going through all these numbers and looking at this. And then most of the folks, we had about a 30-person statewide study committee. And almost everybody came back and said, yep, probably more. And over a 50-year period, almost $1 trillion. So part of what you'll see in those materials, and part of what you'll hear me talk about here in just a few minutes, is we've been talking for years and years about the whole idea of what if all generous Nebraskans just gave back 5% of what they've made and accumulated to their hometowns? In my little hometown of Red Cloud, I'm the 6th of 6 kids, as I mentioned. My parents are treating my hometown as a 7th child. So what are all the different things you can do with this information to help people embrace the idea of abundance? And then talk about the fact that there really is plenty to go around. And we know that we're going to need these philanthropic resources in our communities to continue to have a tremendous quality of life, to continue to help less fortunate to do things, for early childhood education, to help people age in place, to continue to pursue strategies associated with entrepreneurship, to continue to work on leadership development and all of these inclusivity issues we've been talking about. And most importantly, and I think this is what Cindy will primarily talk about, to dream. Because we really can't use government money to dream anymore. Once upon a time we probably could, not anymore. Whoops, I'm going the wrong direction. Again, some information on the inside of there. These are just the regions we broke it out into. But in every one of these regions, the numbers are just shocking. They're just shocking. So, you know, the little part of the world where I grew up, almost $5 billion in the next 10 years. This is all the sand hills out here. Almost 4 billion, over 5 billion. These are sparsely populated places. These are places where you might have 100 cows to every person. I keep going the wrong direction. Here's the really important element of this is because of demographics, because of outmigration, because of people like me who grew up in Red Cloud, now live in Lincoln. So of my parents' 6 children, only 2 of them continue to live in Red Cloud and Webster County. The other 4 of us live someplace else. So if my parents do what parents typically do, what happens to their estate? Can I get an amen? What happens to it? 2/3 of it leaves, right? So what this is just this mass extrapolation of the little micro example I'm giving you of my family. So my parents' estate will be modest, but by them giving 1/7 of their estate back to our community, well, what if 50 other families in Red Cloud did that? Red Cloud's about 1,000 people. That's a difference maker. So this is sort of the last slide here, and then we'll start digging into this. This is the campaign we've put together we call 5 to Thrive. And it could be with 5 Nebraska thrives, give 5 and McCook thrives, 5 to Thrive for Nebraska City. But we tried to put it together so it could be localized. Because people aren't going to give to Nebraska. People are going to give to McCook. People are going to give to Red Cloud. People are going to give to Boone County. I mean, whatever they consider to be home. So as we framed all of this, we tried to figure out, okay, how do we take all of this massive information, break it into bite-sized chunks, and then begin to think about how do you message it. And then here's the tagline. Once our wealth leaves, it's gone forever. Once our wealth is endowed, it's here forever. The time to act is now. The opportunity will never be greater. So with that, Cindy, if you want to talk a little bit about McCook and kind of how you're beginning to use some of this, then we'll come back, take some questions, and I'll probably help you dig into some other county examples as well.
Jeff, can I ask a question? So, maybe I missed something. 5 represents 5%?
5 represents 5%. So like if there's a $100 billion transfer of wealth statewide, if everybody gave 5%, that'd be $5 billion.
How many foundations are there in Nebraska?
We have about 250 affiliated funds through the Nebraska Community Foundation. And there's 18 or 20 other community foundations. Lincoln has its own community foundation. Omaha has its own community foundation. There's sort of a smattering of others. So that's the general landscape. Go ahead,
Okay,
Cindy.
so Jeff told you the magic here, the thing that we would all like to do, but how do we actually do that? And so every one of our affiliated funds is approaching this on a local basis, because we know that each of us know what our community or our area needs and what their values are. So in McCook, we have an FAC, a Fund Advisory Committee that has 12 members. And each one of our members has to go out. We have a monthly meetings, but every month they have to have gone out and talked to somebody. And they report on this conversation. So my first one was to my financial advisor. And I talked to her about how we build this for the community and how it's going to leave something in the presence for all of our kids to come. And did she really buy into what I had to say? No. But you know what? I had that conversation with her. And I reported back to our FAC. We have a spreadsheet which holds everyone accountable. And I know she's going to think about it because I want her to talk to other people about it. But at the next conversation I'm going to have is with an older family member and talk about this. And I'm hoping I'm a little more successful that time. But my point is, this is all a conversation that you have to have. And the McCook Foundation has been in existence for 20 years. So these things just don't happen overnight. You have to build some capacity within your communities. I talk about my individual story about how I am going to, what I'm going to leave McCook Community Foundation Fund and the Nebraska Community Foundation when I leave. That's a good place to start the conversation. You know, I'm doing this, you know, you can do it too. It doesn't, you know, it does not, you're not giving away the farms by any means. You're just going to give away a portion to leave a better life for the family and the community that you've loved and have raised your children. One of the examples I have about building the capacity is our foundation, 2 years ago, just unexpectedly received 3 gifts, and we had $1.4 million gifts. But that was because we built that capacity in the past. And as people got older, they saw, okay, we know our community foundation is going to use this money wisely to build a better place for Nebraskans to live. So they left that money with us. Did we go out and ask for it? Not pointedly, but they knew who we were and they knew the work that we had done. And if we look at what we can have in the future in McCook, if we can have $8.3 million in endowments and expectancies to give out each year, we can really make an impact in McCook. We can work with the issues of diversity and education and equal access for everybody in our community. So, you know, it's the work we do now, and I don't suppose I'll be around when we actually realize that amount, but I do know we will get there because we have committed people that care about our community.
So one of the ways, so there's a sheet of paper inside the materials we handed out. It says Progress in McCook. So McCook's not a huge place, 7,500 people. It's halfway between Lincoln and Denver. So it's, you know, it's a ways out in the high plains. They've had tremendous success in McCook, and you can kind of see that on the top half of the front page. But if you go to the bottom half of the front page, what we've been able to do is take the transfer of wealth in that county and then actually right-size it to McCook. So we think the transfer of wealth in McCook is $422 billion. So 5% of that is $21 million. So what we've done with the transfer of wealth here is we've taken it from these massive, ununderstandable numbers to numbers people can begin to, you know, a goal always needs to be conceivable, believable, and achievable. So $21 million becomes an understandable number in McCook. So what we've done is we've combined what they have in endowments plus what they know as confirmed plan gifts as expectancies. Those total up to $8.3 million. Their goal in McCook is to try to get to 5% of that transfer of wealth in endowments and expectancies. And right now, they're not even 40% of the way there. So they've had enormous success, but they're still just seeing the tip of the iceberg. They're not really seeing anything under the water.
Is that in unrestricted funds or necessarily?
We've just done it in terms of endowments and the planned gifts that are likely to be endowed.
We know we can't continue to raise funds with, we do a lot of challenge grants, a 2-for-1 match. We can't continue to go to people and ask for this. We've done a very good job of doing that, and we'll probably continue to do that to our donors to some extent. But the transfer of wealth gives us an opportunity that we would have never thought of having until this research got put together and brought to us.
So it becomes, you're kind of taking, one of the things that's always been perplexing to me about endowment building is how much, right? People don't have any sense of that unless they're sort of saying, oh, we're going to need a $100,000 subsidy every year for this program. So then you sort of back through the payout to figure out how much your endowment needs to be. Well, this way you're taking this massive abundance and beginning to shrink it to the point where it becomes understandable. And hopefully understandable is a goal. And hopefully understandable to donors to understand, oh, yeah, oh, geez, I didn't really realize we have a $20 million estate. Lots and lots of people out there with $20 million estates that really have no idea they have $20 million estates. Well, 5% of a $20 million estate is $1 million. So we're putting together materials like these and helping affiliated funds to sort of take the transfer of wealth and personalize it, and then be able to see, oh, we have tremendous traction. We've already got 16 planned gifts in place, and we combine that with the endowments we have. We've got 8.3 million we know of. Well, sometimes we see this with volunteer groups, right? Because, right, oh, wow, we've been incredibly successful. We can just sort of sit on our laurels for a while. But if we go back to this map, here's McCook. I would suggest in both McCook and the little town I grew up in, which is right here, the transfer of wealth isn't peaking 20 years from now, it's peaking today. So we can't wait 10 or 15 years to be having these conversations with these people. We need their friends and neighbors like Cindy to be out having their conversations and saying, what do you want your legacy to be? I mean, none of these conversations happen in one conversation, right? You start the conversation, you plant a few seeds. One of the things we do in the Nebraska Community Foundation is tell lots and lots of stories, both of the success that's occurred in that community and the successes that's occurred in lots of other communities, to try to inspire people and invite them into dreaming with us. Well, what kind of community do we want to live in? What kind of community do you want your kids and grandkids to live in? What do you want your legacy to be? And then we use this information to help them think, oh, I guess $50,000 in our estate, if our estate is $20 million, well, we could probably do more than that, right? It's just getting in that mindset of abundance and helping people to really think about what's actually the case in comparison to what their perceptions were 20, 30, 40 years ago. You want to talk about how you use the backside of this a little bit?
Well, right now we have an annual payoff. I'm a teacher, I always think I don't need this, but there. Right now we have a little less than 200. We're feedbacking off each other. I can't go very far.
Oh.
Right now we have about a $200,000 payout a year, which we grant out 2 times a year for requests from the community. That took 20 years to get, to build that by some very dedicated people. So, you know, we're looking forward to revving that pace up now with the transfer of wealth and start with our conversations. But some of the things that we've done lately, and we just did a round of grants this last week, and we're going to really make some impacts in the community. I don't know if I can talk about it yet, but you're not going to tell anybody, right, in McCook? So we're going to really do some projects in McCook that are going to move and shake McCook a little bit. Well, if I get to McCook before I get home, I know where I'm coming back to. So one of the things we did, COVID, we did a really quick response, probably quicker than our state did anything. And I know quicker than our federal government did anything. But one of the things, you can see a little picture here, we had artists make paintings around town just to tell people that we are one, we're together, we're all bison, we're in this together. you see the kids there. We have a youth group. It's called YCR, Youth Change Reaction. And we give them, I think, close to $10,000 a year to do a project. And what they did was they built a bus barn out at a local lake. And people can just borrow and use the bikes to ride the bike trails and put them back. They are going to embark on a new thing. They went larger. They have an $80,000 project. They're going to put in a drive-in movie portable unit in the fairgrounds, and it's going to be accessible to all communities, but they're going to have to do an ask. So we're going to go through a training, and one of our board members have to go with each one of our youth and make an ask. So we're hoping we can teach our young people how to raise money and how to help their community. It's a big project. Are they going to get it done? I hope so. Will we still learn from something if it doesn't happen? Yeah, we will. We'll still learn something. You know, maybe we have to go at it a different way. But that's what we do with our young kids. We support the school, which most of us do in our small communities. We really support our schools. One of our things is childcare, quality childcare. So we have donated to it's called C4K in Nebraska, Children for Communities. And we have raised over 100 childcare spots with the things that we have done. And that's significant in our community. As you can see, we have a list. Bison's Days is something, since we're the Bison, it's an outreach to the community and the students working together on a couple projects. So do we do a lot of things? Yes, we do a lot of things. And do people in McCook know about it? Yes, they do. But I think they're going to know more about us when we start talking about transfer of wealth. Jeff?
Yep, I'm on. So also in your materials, there's a sheet that says Valley County. So in Nebraska, there's 93 counties. You can see Valley County on that map. There's a little black square around it on that map toward the bottom of the sheet. So right in the center of the state, a place where we've been doing a lot of work for 20 plus years. They now have a variety of affiliated funds, a community-based affiliated fund, a hospital foundation, a school foundation, a variety of donor-advised funds. Collectively, those have $10 million of endowed money in them. And there's 8 expectancies in place that total about $4 million. So you look at that and you're like, wow, those guys are close to $15 million in this little county that's 4,000 people. This is extraordinary. They're still not at 5%. 5% for them is $20 million. And what we're beginning to see in all these places where we constantly have this conversation of abundance and possibility and invitation is all sorts of interesting things come up, because in essence we're creating an ecosystem or almost a wetland that nurtures new things. You know, wetlands purify and wetlands nurture. And what we're trying to do with philanthropy in Nebraska is use the philanthropy to be that. Because in McCook, with a $5 million unrestricted endowment and $200,000 a year of unrestricted grant making, I think it's fair to say, Cindy, you guys are dreaming in completely different ways than you were a decade ago. And the
Are you staff?
We have a part-time coordinator that helps, but a lot of it comes from our own community fund people.
So part of our model in the Nebraska Community Foundation has been to try to see how far we can get by having this be almost exclusively volunteer-driven and volunteer-led. So their staff person in McCook, 15 to 20 hours a week. I have 24 other colleagues. So the Nebraska Community Foundation only has 25 employees. We have about 1,500 community leaders that are helping to lead these affiliated funds, and in each and every year there's 9,000 to 10,000 donors to these affiliated funds. But we're trying to get as far as we possibly can by having volunteers like Cindy speak to her friends and neighbors as a peer, as opposed to a paid person sort of being delegated to go and do this. Now, that's the experiment we're running. Are there lots of different ways to skin a cat? There's lots of different ways to skin a cat, so explaining all of that isn't to say anybody else is doing anything wrong. It's just that's what we're trying to do, because we're trying to ultimately change, and this is part of what I'll talk about tonight. We're trying to help people understand that the money's a tool, and that the most important why is in Nebraska, we've been talking our kids out of these small towns for decades, and we need to stop doing that. And what's really encouraging in places like McCook and Red Cloud and lots of other places, Ord, which is in Valley County, the answers we're getting to youth surveys today are vastly different than they were a decade ago. Part of that's because of society, part of that's because of circumstances, and part of it is because community leaders are having conversations with them. Community leaders are having conversations with one another, and they're beginning to see not stories of despair or not stories of poor us, but stories of success and stories of accomplishment. So much of this is narrative. There's a fair amount of narrative as you go through this, especially the bottom of this page. Just, I mean, with philanthropy, we can do almost any sort of public good we can possibly imagine. So let's dream big. Yes, sir.
Maybe this is getting in the weeds, but are you, I assume this is the how of this transfer?
Can you repeat
You're
that,
donating
please?
these farmers are gonna donate a quarter section of land. And are you helping to facilitate that as well?
Yeah.
So they would get the tax benefit of doing that? And so you haven't talked about that piece of the how you're gonna do this. You're setting up the why to do it, which I completely understand, but are you also doing the how?
We are doing the how.
Okay, yep.
And the how is, of course, a team effort. So we have lots and lots of relationships with professional advisors out there, attorneys, accountants, bankers, brokers, funeral home directors, insurance agents, anybody that's having a conversation with somebody about financial planning or end-of-life planning. We're hoping that, fund advisory committee leaders are, again, talking with their friends and neighbors. And their friends and neighbors, sometimes right off the bat, and sometimes a year later, come back up to them at a basketball game or church or just at the cafe and say, thanks so much for coming to visit with me in March. We've been thinking about this and we want to do something. I mean, there's a long germination period associated with all of this. And then I think the thing we're seeing with the real estate piece, real estate seems to be the thing that if you have a next generation, whether it plans to farm or not, parting with the land is just this incredibly emotional thing. So we really try to help people sit down and work through, again, with their advisors. What's their most tax-laden asset? What's the asset they have the least emotional connection to? And what's the asset that's going to be a great asset to give away, but not necessarily a great asset to give their kids? So, of course, the answer to all of that is a tax-deferred retirement account. Sort of checks all those boxes, but there's life insurance pieces, et cetera, et cetera. But we've been working on this for a long time, and we're making some progress, and we're trying to do this educational effort and this campaign to try to have lots and lots and lots of these conversations in the next decade, which means that hopefully in the next 30 years, a fair-sized bit of this is happening, and this becomes a community ethos. Because just like Fred was talking about, I'd love to work myself out of a job. And Cindy, does it feel like the ethos is beginning to get built in McCook because of all the different conversations you guys are having?
I think so. The amount of things that you can do. I mean, it's not just taking cash out of your out of what you have for your inheritance. In Southwest Nebraska, there were two brothers that were going to slow down their farming, and so they sold all their farming equipment, and they gifted that to their area foundation fund. But they got a heck of a tax cut from doing that, and that's why they did it that way. And it has reinvigorated their community. I mean, their community's on fire right now because of what these two brothers did, and it helped them. So it was a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, just to follow up, I think coming from an agricultural background myself, a lot of this land's been in the same family for 100, 150 years. So parting with it is like selling your firstborn child. So that part that you just told me, I think is as important as creating the why of doing it. They really need counseling to kind of give this thing up. Here in Minnesota, about 50% of all the land farmed is rented. And so there is a cash flow that's already going to those heirs that, they get this check and they're living in Omaha, they're living in Minneapolis. How have you dealt with that issue? Because it seems like it would complicate this sort of this is working pretty good for me already, type thing.
Well, people should never give to charity solely for tax purposes, whether it be income tax purposes or estate tax purposes. Taxes are a way of starting the conversation. Sometimes they're a bit of an attention getter. So some people just aren't generous. Okay, fine, free country. So what we're most interested in always doing is identifying the people that are already interested in drinking the Kool-Aid, and they've probably already drunk a little bit of it, and helping them to take the next steps to really think through what they want their legacy to be. And many times, if the parents have that ethos, the children do as well. That gets, and it's, so we see lots of affiliated fund leaders, less so than we used to, but lots of affiliated fund leaders that will just bang their head against the wall because the wealthiest person in the county isn't charitable. And my point is if they're not, you're not going to make them be so. We're trying, so my advice on this always is identify the low-hanging fruit and pick that before you ever get on a ladder. And so what's all the pieces and all the people, and then people sometimes say, oh, Joe and Marge are doing that and Phil and Mary are doing that. Maybe we ought to think about that too. Yes, ma'am.
With these transfer of wealth conversations, is the focus or encouragement on the unrestricted funds, or is it on a donor advised fund, or just kind of wherever it feels best for the donor? What's your focus?
So I think so I'm an economist. I worked in the governor's office for many years. I think about public finance a lot. From a Nebraska Community Foundation mission fulfillment standpoint, I would love to see as much of this as possible go into these unrestricted community endowments that community volunteers are the decision makers over. Some donors are absolutely delighted to go there. Others know they want to create a scholarship to memorialize their mother. Or others know that, boy, my Aunt Martha was a reader. We really want to do something for the library. So, most of it's just about getting the conversation going. And part of what we're trying to do and part of what's impressive in McCook as they've done these successive campaigns is there's now lots and lots of volunteer community leaders in McCook that are having these conversations. So like the most recent challenge grant they did in McCook, they had 43 community volunteers at a Make the Ask training to be able to do it. And not only did that help with their unrestricted endowment, actually it kicked off a whole number of other good things in terms of empowering people to go have these conversations.
I think one of the saddest things that I saw in a small town near us, and it was a single farmer, and he, as he was aging, had quite a little bit of land. A fair amount in the county. And he passed away suddenly. Well, he didn't have any children, but he had some nieces and nephews. None of them lived in this small town. So the land got sold. They took everything and left town. And the land got sold to somebody out of the state of Nebraska, and now they cash rent it out. So that's what we don't want to see. We don't want to see people be forced to have their legacy sold out without a plan. And I use that story a lot, and I don't want that to happen to my farm either. So that's what really hits a farmer, that, you know, make your decisions now.
Jeff, you guys work with some more urban community foundations as well, or no?
Not really.
Just
Lincoln has its own community foundation, Omaha has its own community foundation, so lots of people will get their professional advisors will be there. But the vast majority of the places we work with are places the size of McCook and smaller.
Okay, because it seems to me, and I come from a rural community, same as Steve, actually.
Yeah.
And it seems that people who come from rural agricultural-based communities are more likely to give like unrestricted gifts just for the benefit of the community versus I live in a tourism area and you know, wooded tourism, very little agriculture, and there's just much less interest or connection to that community, a sense of community ownership, I guess, if you will, than we see, I think, in our more rural partner communities. So that's why I was curious
Yeah.
if you had noticed a difference. So.
And certainly part of, you know, I mean, we're a community building organization that's trying to use philanthropy as a tool. So one of the things we try to spend a lot of time on is to get to know that community and to help that community get to know that community. Because there's so many decisions that get made, especially in small towns, based upon perception and nostalgia, as opposed to present day facts. And again, you're not trying to tear anything down. You're just trying to help everybody really understand this is what's going on. And it's amazing to me how many community leaders had no idea that many kids were eligible for free and reduced lunch, or that many single moms were living on that kind of money trying to raise a couple kids. Just those sorts of circumstances. And you're just trying to fit it all together, and the key thing we're trying to do is empower thousands and thousands of people to have those conversations. Because if we're having those conversations, we're going to have healthier, more vibrant places that young people want to be a part of.
But when you have that 150-year connection to a community, you know, that the land has been in the family,
Yeah.
there's a real connection there. So.
Yeah, and that's part of what you're banking on, right? Is they care very much. And how do we help them take their passion and help other good things come of that? So I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you all very much.